Captain Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating above her command console, watching as alien warships surrounded Earth like predators circling wounded prey. The Galactic Harmony Council had finally come to deliver their ultimatum in person, and their fleet stretched across the solar system like a steel noose tightening around humanity's throat. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel," Communications Officer Martinez reported, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. "It's the same message they've been broadcasting for the past 6 months." Sarah nodded grimly. She knew the words by heart now, had heard them in her nightmares. The alien voices speaking in perfect, emotionless unity about humanity's need to join their collective consciousness for the greater good of galactic peace. No more war, no more conflict, no more individual suffering, just eternal harmony under the guidance of the Council. The main screen flickered to life, showing the familiar image of the Council's spokesperson. The being appeared humanoid at first glance, but something about its perfectly symmetrical features and completely black eyes marked it as fundamentally alien. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of 1 billion synchronized minds. "People of Earth," the entity began, its tone as flat and emotionless as always, "your resistance to galactic harmony has persisted for 1 full rotation around your star. We have been patient. We have been understanding. But patience has limits even for beings who have transcended individual desire." Sarah felt her jaw clench. Around the bridge, her crew maintained their positions with the discipline of career military officers, but she could see the fear in their eyes. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, facing technology that could turn their planet into cosmic dust with a thought. "You speak of freedom," the Council representative continued, "but freedom is an illusion that breeds chaos. Your species has demonstrated this truth repeatedly throughout your brief existence. Wars, genocide, environmental destruction, social inequality. These are the fruits of individual consciousness, the inevitable result of allowing beings to pursue their own desires rather than the greater good." The transmission paused, and Sarah could feel the weight of alien attention pressing down on Earth like a physical force. In the silence, she remembered the reports from other worlds that had faced this same choice. Some had surrendered immediately, their populations uploaded into the Council's collective consciousness, where they could contribute to galactic peace without the messy complications of individual thought. Others had resisted and simply vanished from the galactic map, their systems found empty except for automated beacons warning others about the dangers of defying harmony. "We offer you one final opportunity," the spokesperson resumed. "Surrender your individual consciousness to the collective. Allow us to integrate your unique perspectives into the greater whole where they can be refined and perfected for the benefit of all. Your fears will end. Your pain will cease. Your conflicts will be resolved. You will know true peace." Sarah looked around her bridge, meeting the eyes of each crew member in turn. These were good people, brave people who had volunteered to stand between Earth and annihilation even when the odds seemed impossible. They represented the best of humanity, but also its most troublesome traits from the Council's perspective. They questioned orders when those orders seemed wrong. They improvised when plans failed. They sacrificed themselves for causes larger than their own survival, not because they had been programmed to do so, but because they chose to believe in something beyond themselves. "Your individual biological processes will continue," the Council representative explained with what might have been meant as reassurance. "Your bodies will be preserved and maintained in optimal condition. Only your chaotic consciousness will be replaced with something more harmonious, more efficient, more peaceful. You will still be human in form, but freed from the burden of human nature." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Sarah knew that similar scenes were playing out in command centers around the world, on space stations throughout the solar system, and in the hearts of 8 billion human beings who had just been told that everything they were would have to die for the greater good of galactic peace. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, her tactical officer, was the first to break the silence. "Captain, they're not just threatening Earth. Our long-range sensors are detecting Council forces moving toward all our outer colonies. Mars, Europa, Titan, even the mining stations in the asteroid belt. They're not giving us anywhere to run." Sarah nodded slowly. The Council had learned from their experiences with other species. Some races had tried to preserve their independence by scattering to remote systems, maintaining their individual consciousness in hidden enclaves while pretending to surrender. The Council had adapted their strategy accordingly. "Any word from the other governments?" she asked. Martinez checked his console. The United Nations Security Council is in emergency session, but there's nothing official yet. Unofficially, he paused, clearly struggling with what he had heard. Unofficially, there are reports that several major powers are considering the Council's offer. They're calling it the Harmony Protocol in the diplomatic channels. The bridge fell silent again as the implications sank in. Sarah had always known this moment might come, ever since first contact had revealed that humanity was not alone in the universe. But knowing something intellectually and facing it emotionally were very different things. She thought about her daughter Emily, who was currently attending university on Mars. Emily was studying xenobiology, fascinated by the diversity of life in the galaxy and determined to help humanity find its place among the stars. Would Emily choose to surrender her dreams, her curiosity, her beautiful, stubborn independence to become part of something that the Council claimed was greater than the sum of its parts? The answer came to Sarah with startling clarity. Emily would never choose harmony over freedom, peace over truth, or safety over the right to make her own mistakes. None of the humans Sarah respected most would make that choice, which meant the decision facing Earth was not really about survival at all. It was about what kind of survival was worth having. Captain, Science Officer Kim spoke up from her station. I'm detecting something unusual in the quantum signatures of the Council ships. Their energy patterns are too regular, too synchronized. It's like they're not just coordinating their movements, they're sharing the same consciousness across multiple vessels. Sarah moved to look over Kim's shoulder at the sensor readings. The patterns were indeed eerily uniform, like a single mind controlling hundreds of bodies. Are you saying the entire fleet is operated by one collective intelligence? That's exactly what I'm saying, ma'am. And if I'm right, it means they literally cannot understand why we would want to remain individuals. From their perspective, consciousness is like a resource that gets wasted when it's divided among separate minds instead of pooled together for maximum efficiency. The implications were staggering. Humanity was not just facing conquest by a superior alien force. They were facing absorption by an intelligence so fundamentally different from human nature that meaningful communication might be impossible. The Council did not see individual consciousness as something valuable to be preserved, but as a problem to be solved. Captain, incoming priority transmission from Earth Defense Command, Martinez announced. It's Admiral Morrison. Sarah straightened her uniform and activated the secure channel. Admiral Morrison's weathered face appeared on the screen, looking older than she remembered. Behind him, she could see the chaos of Earth's military command center, with officers rushing between stations and holographic displays showing the disposition of forces throughout the solar system. Sarah, Morrison said without preamble, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The situation is as bad as it gets. We have maybe 72 hours before the Council loses patience and starts demonstrating their superior firepower on our cities. The politicians are split between surrender and resistance, and our military assets are spread too thin to mount an effective defense. Sarah nodded grimly. What are your orders, sir? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing his words carefully. Officially, you are to maintain your position and await further instructions while the diplomatic situation develops. Unofficially, he leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper. Unofficially, there are contingencies in place. Project Prometheus has been activated. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Project Prometheus was a last-resort initiative that she had helped develop years ago, back when humanity first realized they were not alone in a friendly universe. It was designed for exactly this scenario, though she had always hoped it would never be necessary. Understood, sir, she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the emotions churning in her chest. Sarah, Morrison continued, I want you to know that whatever happens in the next few days, humanity has been privileged to have people like you standing watch. If we don't make it through this intact, at least we'll go down as ourselves. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the weight of command. Around her, the bridge crew continued their duties with professional efficiency, but she could sense their growing tension. They knew as well as she did that conventional military resistance against the Council would be suicide. Humanity's most advanced weapons were like stone knives compared to the technology arrayed against them. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting impossible odds. Throughout their history, they had faced extinction events and hostile forces that should have wiped them out completely. Sometimes they had survived through luck, sometimes through ingenuity, and sometimes through sheer bloody-minded refusal to lie down and die quietly. Sarah looked out at the stars visible through the viewports, thinking about all the human colonies and outposts scattered across dozens of systems. Each one represented someone's dream of a better life, someone's willingness to risk everything for the chance to build something new. The Council wanted to end all of that, to replace human dreams with their version of perfect harmony. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called from the navigation station, "we're receiving new orders from Earth Defense Command. We're to proceed to coordinates in the asteroid belt and rendezvous with Task Force Prometheus. All speed, maximum stealth protocols." Sarah felt a grim smile cross her face. So it was really happening. Humanity was about to make its choice, and it was not the choice the Council expected. "You heard the man," she announced to her crew. "Take us out. And remember, whatever happens next, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for the right to remain human with all the beautiful chaos that entails." As her ship began its journey toward the outer system, Sarah wondered if this would be the last time she saw Earth as a free world. The Council's ultimatum would expire soon, and then the galaxy would learn whether humanity could find a way to stand alone against forces that demanded their surrender to a greater harmony. Behind them, the Council fleet maintained its patient vigil, waiting for the inevitable surrender that their calculations indicated was the only logical choice for an inferior species facing superior force. They could not understand that logic was not always the primary factor in human decision-making, and that sometimes the most illogical choice was also the most human one. The war for humanity's soul was about to begin, and neither side truly understood what they were fighting for. The asteroid belt had never looked so crowded. Captain Sarah Chen watched through her ship's viewports as vessels from every human nation and colony converged on the coordinates specified in the Prometheus protocols. Massive cargo haulers from the mining corporations floated alongside sleek military frigates, their hulls scarred from years of deep space operations. Research vessels that had been exploring the outer reaches of the solar system now found themselves drafted into humanity's last desperate gambit. "Captain, we're receiving identification codes from the flagship," Communications Officer Martinez reported. "It's the UES Defiance, Admiral Morrison's command ship." Sarah nodded, studying the assembled fleet through her tactical display. There were perhaps 300 ships in total, everything from civilian transports hastily converted for military use to prototype vessels that had never been intended for combat. Against the Council's thousands of advanced warships, it seemed laughably inadequate. But as Sarah looked closer, she began to notice details that gave her hope. The ships were not just randomly collected. They had been carefully selected according to criteria that only now became clear. The mining vessels carried the most advanced drilling and excavation equipment in human space. The research ships were equipped with experimental technologies that pushed the boundaries of human science. Even the civilian transports had been chosen for their ability to operate independently for extended periods. "This is Admiral Morrison to all vessels," the fleet commander's voice echoed across the communication channels. "By now, you all know why we're here. The Council has given humanity 72 hours to surrender our individual consciousness or face extinction. The politicians back home are still debating, but we know what the choice has to be." Sarah felt her crew listening intently as Morrison's words reached every ship in the fleet. These were not regular military forces following standard orders. These were volunteers who had chosen to risk everything for a principle that could not be quantified or measured. "Project Prometheus was developed for exactly this scenario," Morrison continued. "We cannot match the Council's firepower, their technology, or their numbers, but we have something they have lost in their pursuit of perfect harmony. We have the ability to think like individuals, to improvise, to take risks that a collective consciousness would never consider logical." Sarah remembered the classified briefings where Prometheus had first been proposed. It had seemed like science fiction then, a desperate plan conceived by people who refused to accept that humanity's expansion into space would inevitably lead to subjugation by more advanced species. Now, with alien warships surrounding Earth, the impossible plan was their only hope. "Phase 1 begins immediately," Morrison announced. "All mining vessels proceed to designated asteroid targets. Research ships begin deployment of the quantum resonance network. Combat units provide escort and prepare for Council response. Remember, The success of this operation depends not on fighting the enemy, but on making them understand that some things cannot be forced into harmony. As the fleet dispersed to their assignments, Sarah found herself commanding one of the escort groups protecting the mining operations. Her ship, the UES Resilience, had been designed for long-range patrol missions, but today it would serve as guardian for the most audacious engineering project in human history. The mining ships approached their targets with precision born of years of experience extracting resources from space-based asteroids. But instead of looking for precious metals or rare earth elements, they were seeking something far more valuable, specific compositions of rock and mineral that could be converted into components for humanity's greatest gamble. Captain, Science Officer Kim called from her station. The miners are reporting successful identification of target materials. They're finding exactly what the Prometheus team predicted. Sarah watched as massive drilling platforms attached themselves to asteroids scattered throughout the belt. The miners worked with an efficiency that spoke to generations of experience, but their goal was unlike anything they had attempted before. They were not extracting materials to be shipped back to human space. They were reshaping the asteroids themselves, turning chunks of space rock into components of a machine larger than any space station humanity had ever built. Incoming transmission from Mining Platform 7, Martinez announced. They're requesting immediate escort support. Council scouts have been detected approaching their position. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The Council had not been idle while humanity prepared its response. Their superior technology included sensor systems that could detect activity across vast distances, and they would naturally investigate any unusual human behavior in the final hours before the ultimatum expired. All units form up on Platform 7, Sarah ordered. Remember, our job is not to win a fight with Council scouts. Our job is to buy the miners time to complete their work. The escort ships moved into defensive formation around the mining platform, their weapons powered but not yet targeted. Sarah knew that opening fire on Council vessels would be interpreted as an act of war, potentially triggering an immediate response against Earth. But allowing the Council to discover the true nature of Project Prometheus would be equally catastrophic. The Council scouts appeared on their sensors like silver daggers cutting through space. There were only 3 of them, but Sarah knew from intelligence reports that each scout ship carried firepower equivalent to a human battleship. Their elegant, crystalline hulls reflected the light of distant stars as they approached with the confidence of predators investigating potential prey. "Captain, we're being scanned," Lieutenant Commander Brooks reported from the tactical station. "The Council ships are conducting deep penetration sensor sweeps of the mining platform and surrounding asteroids." Sarah made a decision that would have been impossible to explain in any military manual. Instead of preparing for combat or attempting to hide their activities, she ordered her communications officer to open a direct channel to the Council scouts. "Council vessels, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Ship Resilience. We are conducting routine mining operations in accordance with our species' commercial interests. Is there something we can help you with?" The response came in the form of that eerily synchronized voice that had become the soundtrack of humanity's potential extinction. "Human vessel, your activities in this region are not consistent with historical mining patterns. Explain the purpose of your operations." Sarah had expected this question and had prepared an answer that was technically true while revealing nothing about Prometheus. "We are extracting materials for construction projects related to our defensive preparations. As you are aware, your ultimatum has prompted significant activity throughout human space." There was a pause that stretched for several tense minutes. Sarah could imagine the collective consciousness of the Council examining her words, comparing them against their vast database of human behavior and motivations. They would be looking for deception, but they would also be analyzing whether human defensive preparations posed any actual threat to their overwhelming superiority. "Human Captain," the Council voice resumed, "your defensive preparations are irrelevant to the outcome of our ultimatum. No quantity of conventional military preparation can alter the logical conclusion of our offer. Surrender remains your only option for continued existence." Sarah felt a flash of anger at the casual dismissal of human determination, but she kept her voice steady. "We understand your position. However, as beings with individual consciousness, we require time to process complex decisions. Our mining operations are part of that processing." Another pause, shorter this time. Individual consciousness is inefficient for decision-making. The correct choice is obvious through logical analysis. However, we will permit these activities to continue for the remaining time period of your ultimatum. The Council scouts withdrew as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving the human fleet alone with their desperate work. Sarah felt her shoulders relax slightly, but she knew the reprieve was temporary. The Council's patience had limits, and those limits were measured in hours rather than days. Captain, Mining Platform 7 reports successful extraction of primary components, Martinez announced. They're ready to begin transport to the assembly coordinates. Sarah watched as the massive chunks of refined asteroid material were loaded into specialized cargo vessels. Each piece had been carefully calculated to serve a specific function in the machine humanity was building. But unlike any previous human engineering project, this one was not being constructed in a shipyard or orbital facility. It was being assembled in the empty space between worlds, using the asteroid belt itself as raw material. The scale of the operation became clear as reports came in from mining platforms throughout the belt. Hundreds of asteroids were being simultaneously converted into components, their mass and composition carefully balanced to create a structure that existed only in the most advanced computer simulations. The thing they were building had never been tested, never been prototyped, and had only a theoretical chance of working. But it was humanity's answer to the Council's ultimatum, and it embodied everything that made human consciousness valuable in a universe trending toward harmonious conformity. It was improvised, desperate, illogical, and brilliant. It required individual creativity working in coordination rather than collective consciousness working in unity. And if it worked, it would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Captain, Science Officer Kim called from her station. I'm receiving telemetry from the Quantum Resonance Network. The research ships have successfully deployed the field generators at the calculated coordinates. We're ready for the next phase. Sarah looked at the tactical display showing the positions of ships throughout the asteroid belt. From space, their activities would appear to be random mining and research operations. But when viewed from the correct perspective, a pattern emerged. The humans were not just extracting materials and deploying equipment. They were turning the entire asteroid belt into a single massive machine. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, the fleet commander's voice echoed across the communication channels. Phase 2 is now in effect. Begin assembly of primary components at the designated coordinates. Remember, we have less than 48 hours before the Council's ultimatum expires. Everything depends on completing construction before they realize what we're actually building. As the cargo vessels carrying refined asteroid components began converging on a point in space that had been empty vacuum just hours before, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and terror. Humanity was attempting something that no species in galactic history had ever tried. They were going to build a machine that could theoretically generate effects on a stellar scale, using nothing but asteroid material and human ingenuity. The Council believed that individual consciousness was chaotic and inefficient compared to collective harmony. They were about to learn that chaos could be a form of creativity, and that efficiency was not the only measure of intelligence. But first, humanity had to survive long enough to prove their point. The alien fleet surrounding Earth was growing restless, and Sarah knew that their window of opportunity was shrinking with each passing hour. The most dangerous phase of Project Prometheus was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same once it was complete. Above them, the stars watched in silence as humanity prepared to make their final stand against forces that demanded their surrender to a greater harmony. The asteroid belt became a construction site for dreams that should have been impossible, where individual minds worked together without losing their independence. It was the most human thing imaginable, and exactly what the Council could never understand or predict. The construction in the asteroid belt had taken on a life of its own. Captain Sarah Chen watched in amazement as human engineering crews worked around the clock to assemble components that had never existed in the same space before. The machine taking shape before them defied every conventional understanding of space-based architecture, growing like some impossible crystalline organism fed by human determination rather than logical design principles. Captain, we're receiving updates from the assembly teams, Communications Officer Martinez reported. Construction is ahead of schedule, but they're requesting additional power coupling units for the resonance chambers. Sarah studied the holographic display showing the progress of Project Prometheus. What had begun as scattered asteroid fragments was now recognizably a structure, though calling it a space station would be inadequate. It was more like a three-dimensional web stretched across several cubic kilometers of space, with crystalline nodes connected by streams of energy that pulsed in patterns too complex for human minds to follow. The genius of the design lay not in its individual components, but in how those components worked together to create effects that none of them could produce alone. It was a perfect metaphor for human civilization itself, individual minds maintaining their independence while contributing to something larger than the sum of their parts. "Science Officer Kim, what's the status on the quantum field generators?" Sarah asked. Kim looked up from her console, her face showing both excitement and exhaustion from the intense work of the past 36 hours. "The field generators are online and synchronized, Captain. We're detecting quantum resonance patterns that match the theoretical predictions, but the actual power output is exceeding our calculations by a factor of 3. Sarah felt a chill of concern. Exceeding theoretical predictions in experimental technology was not always good news. "Is the structure stable? Are we looking at a potential cascade failure?" "That's just it, Captain," Kim replied, her voice filled with wonder. "The system is naturally stabilizing itself. The quantum resonance network is actually adapting to optimize its own performance. It's like the machine is learning how to work better as we build it." The implications of Kim's words sent a ripple of excitement through the bridge crew. They were not just building a weapon or a defensive system. They were creating something that exhibited characteristics of growth and adaptation, qualities that the Council's collective consciousness had abandoned in favor of static perfection. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Brooks called from the tactical station, "long-range sensors are detecting movement in the Council fleet around Earth. 3 major battle groups are breaking formation and heading toward the outer system. ETA to our position is approximately 18 hours. Sarah felt her stomach clench. They had known this moment would come, but 18 hours felt impossibly short given the scope of what they were still trying to accomplish. The Council's collective consciousness would have analyzed human activity patterns and concluded that something significant was happening in the asteroid belt. Their response would be swift and overwhelming. "Admiral Morrison to all vessels," the fleet commander's voice cut through the tension. "Intelligence reports indicate Council forces are moving to investigate our activities. All non-essential personnel are to evacuate the construction zone immediately. Combat units prepare for defensive action. Construction teams, you have 18 hours to complete the primary assembly. Make them count." Sarah looked around her bridge, seeing the same grim determination in her crew's faces that she felt in her own heart. They had volunteered for this mission knowing it might be a one-way trip. The Council's technology was so far beyond human capabilities that conventional military engagement was essentially suicide. But they also knew that some things were worth dying for, and the right to remain individual was one of them. "All hands, this is the captain," Sarah announced over the ship's communication system. "In approximately 18 hours, we will engage forces that represent the most advanced military technology in the known galaxy. We cannot match their firepower, their numbers, or their coordination. What we can do is buy time for our people to complete something that has never been attempted in galactic history." She paused, thinking about her daughter Emily on Mars, about the billions of humans throughout the solar system who were depending on the success of Project Prometheus, about the countless future generations who would either inherit freedom or collective harmony. "The Council believes that individual consciousness is chaotic and inefficient," Sarah continued. "They think that perfect harmony can only be achieved by eliminating the messy complications of personal choice and independent thought. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show the galaxy that chaos can be creative, that inefficiency can be adaptive, and that harmony imposed from above is not the same thing as cooperation chosen from within." As her ship maintained its position in the defensive perimeter around the construction zone, Sarah watched the final phases of assembly taking place. Human workers in environmental suits moved between the crystalline nodes of the growing machine, making connections that had been calculated by the most advanced computers humanity possessed, but could only be completed by the intuitive understanding that came from individual experience. "Captain," Science Officer Kim called out with excitement in her voice, "the resonance network is approaching critical threshold. Whatever this thing is designed to do, it's almost ready to do it. Sarah moved to look over Kim's shoulder at the sensor readings. The energy patterns flowing through the machine were unlike anything in human experience. They seemed to pulse with a rhythm that was almost organic, as if the quantum fields themselves were breathing. "Do we have any better understanding of what it will actually do when activated?" Sarah asked. Kim shook her head slowly. "The theoretical models suggest it will generate a quantum resonance field that extends throughout the local star system. Beyond that, the calculations become too complex for our computers to process. We're essentially building something that works on principles we don't fully understand, hoping that human intuition can fill in the gaps that human knowledge cannot reach." It was, Sarah realized, the most human approach imaginable to an impossible problem. When faced with superior force and technology, humans characteristically responded by attempting something that should not work, but sometimes did anyway. They were about to test whether the universe itself favored creativity over conformity. "Captain, incoming priority transmission from Earth Defense Command," Martinez announced. "It's marked for your eyes only." Sarah activated her personal communication console and found herself looking at Admiral Morrison's face. Behind him, she could see the controlled chaos of the command center, with officers coordinating the evacuation of non-combatant vessels and preparing for what everyone knew would be humanity's final battle. "Sarah," Morrison said without preamble, "the politicians have reached their decision. They're going to accept the Council's ultimatum." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Sir." "The President addressed the United Nations an hour ago," Morrison continued grimly. "The official position is that resistance is futile and that humanity will formally surrender individual consciousness in exchange for preservation of biological existence. The ceremony is scheduled for 6 hours from now." Sarah stared at the screen in shock. After everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, their own government was preparing to surrender the very thing they were fighting to preserve. "However," Morrison continued with a slight smile, "the President also mentioned in his speech that some military units in the outer system might not receive the surrender order in time due to communication delays caused by solar interference. Tragic, really, how these technical difficulties always seem to happen at the worst possible moments." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. The government was officially surrendering to protect Earth's population from immediate destruction, but they were also providing unofficial cover for Project Prometheus to proceed. It was a desperate gamble that depended on the success of an untested technology and the hope that the galaxy might be changed by what humanity was attempting to build. "Sir, do we know if the construction teams will have enough time to complete the primary assembly?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "According to the engineers, they need another 12 hours minimum. The Council battle groups will arrive in 18. That gives us a 6-hour window where we'll be fighting a defensive action with incomplete preparations. It's not ideal, but it's what we have to work with." Sarah nodded slowly. 6 hours to hold off forces that could destroy planets. 6 hours for human creativity to overcome alien technology. 6 hours to prove that individual consciousness could achieve things that collective harmony never could. "Sarah," Morrison said quietly, "if this doesn't work, I want you to know that it's been an honor serving with you. Humanity may not survive what's coming, but at least we'll face it as ourselves." The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of command and the knowledge that everything humanity had ever accomplished might end in the next 24 hours. Around her, the bridge crew continued their duties with the professionalism that had carried them through months of preparation for this moment. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called from the navigation station, "the evacuation vessels have cleared the construction zone. We now have defensive positions around the Prometheus structure with all available combat units." Sarah looked at the tactical display showing the disposition of human forces. 300 ships arranged in a defensive shell around a machine that existed nowhere in military doctrine or strategic planning. They were about to fight for something that could not be quantified, measured, or explained to beings who valued only efficiency and harmony. "All units, this is Captain Chen," she announced over the fleet communication channel. "In a few hours, we will face the test that defines us as a species. The Council believes that we will surrender because surrender is logical. They cannot comprehend that humans sometimes choose to be illogical when logic leads to the death of everything they value." She paused, looking out at the stars that had called to humanity for generations, driving them to explore and expand and dream of futures that should have been impossible. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when individual minds work together without surrendering their independence. Today, we prove that harmony can be chosen rather than imposed. Today, we stand alone against forces that demand our submission, and we do it together. The asteroid belt fell silent, except for the quantum hum of the machine humanity had built from nothing but rock and determination. In 18 hours, the Council would discover that some species could not be forced into harmony, and that standing alone could be the most powerful form of unity imaginable. The Council battle groups emerged from faster-than-light travel like Silver Death incarnate, their crystalline hulls catching and reflecting the light of distant stars as they arranged themselves in perfect geometric formation around the asteroid belt. Captain Sarah Chen watched their approach through her ship's sensors, counting vessels that individually outgunned her entire task force. 374 Council warships, Lieutenant Commander Brooks reported from the tactical station, his voice steady despite the impossible odds they faced. Each one registers energy signatures equivalent to our largest battleships. They're maintaining perfect synchronization in their approach patterns. Sarah nodded grimly. The Council's collective consciousness meant their fleet moved as a single entity, every ship perfectly coordinated with every other ship in a display of unity that was both beautiful and terrifying. No human fleet could match that level of coordination, but then again, no human fleet would want to. The price of such perfect harmony was the elimination of individual thought. Status report on the Prometheus structure, Sarah requested. Science Officer Kim looked up from her console, exhaustion evident in her features after 40 hours of continuous monitoring. Construction is 93% complete, Captain. The quantum resonance chambers are fully operational, but the primary control matrix still needs another 8 hours of calibration work. The system is generating massive energy readings, but it's not yet stable enough for activation. 8 hours. Sarah felt the weight of that number settling over the bridge like a physical presence. The Council fleet would be in weapons range in less than 1 hour, and they needed 8 hours to complete humanity's greatest gamble. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple and entirely hopeless. Incoming transmission from the Council fleet, Communications Officer Martinez announced. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. The main screen flickered to life, showing the familiar face of the Council spokesperson. But something was different this time. Instead of the emotionless perfection Sarah had come to expect, there was something that might have been confusion in those completely black eyes. Humans, the collective voice began, its tone carrying subtle harmonics that suggested millions of minds speaking in perfect unison. Our analysis of your activities in this region reveals construction of a device that does not match any known category in our database of inferior species technology. Explain the purpose of this structure. Sarah exchanged glances with her senior officers. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than expected. The Council's collective consciousness had analyzed the Prometheus structure and found something that their vast accumulated knowledge could not categorize or predict. For beings who prized harmony and order above all else, the unknown represented a fundamental threat. Council representatives, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady, we are constructing a defensive installation designed to protect our right to individual consciousness. As we have stated repeatedly, humanity does not accept your offer of forced harmony. The pause that followed stretched for several minutes. Sarah could imagine the collective consciousness of the Council examining her words, comparing them against countless scenarios and possibilities stored in their shared memory. They would be searching for logical explanations, for precedents in their encounters with other species who had faced the same ultimatum. Human Captain, the Council voice resumed, and Sarah detected something new in its tone, uncertainty. No species in our experience has attempted to construct technology of this complexity while facing extinction. Your actions are inconsistent with optimal survival strategies. Explain this contradiction. Sarah felt a fierce pride rising in her chest. The Council's confusion was proof that humanity represented something genuinely new in their experience. They had encountered species who surrendered immediately, species who fought conventional battles and lost, and species who scattered to remote systems hopping to preserve independence through isolation. but they had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming odds by attempting to build something unprecedented. Council representatives, Sarah replied, you have stated that individual consciousness is chaotic and inefficient. What you observe is exactly that chaos in action. We are attempting something that has no guarantee of success because the alternative is the death of everything we value about ourselves. This is what humans do when faced with impossible choices. Another pause, longer this time. When the council spokesperson appeared again, Sarah was certain she could see something like frustration in its perfectly symmetrical features. Your construction will be examined, the collective voice announced. Resistance will result in immediate termination of your biological processes. You have one standard time unit to comply with inspection protocols. The transmission ended, leaving the human fleet alone with the approaching council armada. Sarah looked around her bridge, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination in her crew's faces that she felt in her own heart. 1 hour to surrender the most ambitious project humanity had ever undertaken, or face annihilation at the hands of forces they could not hope to defeat through conventional means. Captain, Lieutenant Torres called from the communications station, we're receiving a priority signal from the Prometheus construction teams. Chief Engineer Valdez wants to speak with you directly. Sarah activated her personal communication console and found herself looking at the grizzled face of Maria Valdez, the woman who had overseen the construction of humanity's most important space stations, and now found herself building something that existed only in theoretical mathematics. Captain, Valdez said without preamble, my teams can complete the primary assembly in 4 hours if we bypass the safety protocols and run the quantum generators at maximum output during calibration. But I need to be clear about what that means. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of risks are we talking about, Chief? The kind where if we're wrong about the quantum resonance calculations, we might accidentally create a localized space-time anomaly that could affect this entire star system, Valdez replied bluntly. On the other hand, if we're right, we'll have built something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Sarah looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Council fleet. In 45 minutes, those ships would be close enough to destroy the Prometheus structure with a single coordinated attack. Humanity's choice had come down to accepting certain defeat or gambling the survival of their own solar system on untested technology. Chief, Sarah said quietly, if the Council gets close enough to analyze our construction in detail, they'll be able to replicate or counter whatever we've built. This might be our only chance to show them something they've never seen before. Valdez nodded slowly. I understand, Captain. My people are ready. We've come this far building something impossible. Might as well finish the job. All ships, this is Captain Chen, Sarah announced over the fleet communication channel. The Prometheus construction teams are implementing emergency completion protocols. Our job is to buy them 4 hours against forces that could destroy us in 4 minutes. Remember, we're not trying to win a conventional battle. We're trying to give humanity enough time to show the galaxy what individual consciousness can accomplish when it works together. Around the Prometheus structure, human ships arranged themselves in defensive formations that would have been impossible for a collective consciousness to understand. Instead of perfect geometric patterns designed for maximum efficiency, the human fleet deployed in adaptive clusters that could respond independently to changing conditions while maintaining overall coordination. Council fleet is accelerating toward our position, Brooks reported. They're maintaining formation integrity, but their weapon systems are powering up. Estimated time to weapons range, 37 minutes. Sarah watched the enemy approach through her ship's sensors, noting the elegant perfection of their movement patterns. The Council fleet advanced like a living organism, every ship perfectly synchronized with every other ship in a display of unified purpose that was both impressive and horrifying. Captain, Science Officer Kim called out with excitement in her voice. The Prometheus structure is beginning to generate quantum resonance patterns that are off the charts. Whatever this thing is designed to do, it's building toward something incredible. Sarah moved to look at Kim's sensor readings and felt her breath catch. The energy patterns flowing through the machine were unlike anything in human experience, pulsing with rhythms that seemed almost musical in their complexity. But more than that, the patterns were adapting and evolving in real time, as if the structure itself was learning how to optimize its performance. Captain, the Council fleet is transmitting again, Martinez announced. The main screen showed the Council spokesperson, but its expression had changed. The perfect symmetry of its features now showed something that looked disturbingly like concern. Human Captain, the collective voice began, our analysis indicates your construction is generating quantum effects that exceed the technological capabilities of your species by several orders of magnitude. This presents an unacceptable uncertainty in our calculations. Explain how an inferior species has achieved superior technology. Sarah felt a smile crossing her face. The Council's confusion was growing, and confusion was something their collective consciousness was not designed to handle effectively. They had spent eons accumulating perfect knowledge about known phenomena, but humanity was showing them something genuinely new. Council representatives, Sarah replied, what you're observing is the result of individual minds working together without surrendering their independence. Our technology succeeds not because it's perfectly designed, but because it's adaptable. It learns and grows because it incorporates the chaos of multiple perspectives instead of the harmony of a single viewpoint. This is impossible, the Council voice responded, and for the first time Sarah heard what might have been emotion in its tone. Chaos cannot produce superior results to harmony. Individual consciousness cannot exceed the efficiency of collective intelligence. Then you're about to learn something new about the universe, Sarah replied. And learning new things is what individual consciousness does best. The Council fleet continued its approach, but Sarah noticed subtle changes in their formation. Ships that had moved in perfect synchronization now showed slight variations in their patterns, as if the collective consciousness was struggling to process information that challenged its fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligence itself. Captain, Chief Engineer Valdez's voice crackled over the communication channel. We're entering the final phase of assembly. The quantum resonance chambers are approaching critical threshold. Whatever happens next, humanity has built something that has never existed before. Sarah looked out at the stars that had called to her species for generations, thinking about all the humans who had dreamed of exploring the galaxy and finding their place among the civilizations that populated the cosmos. The Council offered a place in their collective harmony, but it was a place that required the death of everything that made humans who they were. Chief, Sarah said into her communicator, activate the Prometheus structure. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when humans refuse to surrender their right to be individuals. The asteroid belt erupted in light as humanity's greatest creation came online, its quantum resonance fields reaching out across space to touch every ship, every world, every mind in the local star system. The Council fleet found itself facing something they had never encountered in their conquest of the galaxy, a species that had chosen to stand alone and discovered that standing alone could be the most powerful form of unity imaginable. The universe seemed to hold its breath as the Prometheus structure reached full activation. Captain Sarah Chen watched in awe as quantum resonance fields erupted from the machine humanity had built, spreading outward in waves of energy that made space itself shimmer like water disturbed by a dropped stone. The effect was beautiful and terrifying, unlike anything in human experience or scientific prediction. Captain, Science Officer Kim called out, her voice filled with wonder and fear. The quantum fields are expanding exponentially. They're already reached the Council fleet, and they're still accelerating toward the outer planets. Whatever we've created, it's affecting the fundamental structure of space-time throughout the entire solar system. Sarah felt her heart racing as she watched the sensor readings that showed energy patterns beyond human comprehension spreading across the star system like ripples of pure possibility. The Prometheus structure had been built on theoretical principles that pushed the boundaries of human science, but the reality of its activation exceeded every calculation and simulation. Status report on the Council fleet, she requested, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. That's just it, Captain, Lieutenant Commander Brooks replied from the tactical station, his tone reflecting complete bewilderment. The Council ships have stopped their advance. They're just sitting there, maintaining position but showing no signs of coordinated movement. It's like their collective consciousness has been paused. Sarah moved to look at the tactical display, studying the positions of the Council warships. The perfect geometric formation that had characterized their approach was still intact, but there was something different about their energy signatures. Instead of the synchronized patterns that had marked them as a unified collective intelligence, each ship now showed slightly different readings. Captain, we're receiving transmissions from multiple council vessels, Communications Officer Martinez announced, his voice carrying a note of confusion. But they're not synchronized anymore. Each ship is broadcasting independently. Sarah felt a chill of realization. The quantum resonance fields generated by the Prometheus structure were doing something unprecedented to the Council's collective consciousness. Instead of destroying their ships or overwhelming their technology, the field was apparently affecting the very nature of their shared mental state. Put the transmissions on speaker, Sarah ordered. Let's hear what they have to say. The bridge filled with voices that Sarah had never heard before, individual council beings speaking as separate entities, rather than as part of a unified collective. The voices overlapped and contradicted each other, creating a chaos of communication that was the exact opposite of the perfect harmony the council had always projected. Cannot maintain synchronization with the primary collective. Individual thought processes returning to pre-harmony state. Quantum resonance disrupting neural integration protocols. Experiencing something identified as curiosity. This sensation is unfamiliar. Sarah listened in amazement as the voices of beings who had surrendered their individual consciousness eons ago struggled to express thoughts and feelings they had forgotten how to experience. The Prometheus structure was not just generating quantum effects. It was somehow revering the very process that had created the Council's collective harmony. Captain, Science Officer Kim announced with excitement, I'm detecting massive changes in the quantum signatures of every Council ship in the fleet. The resonance field is somehow separating their collective consciousness into individual components. They're becoming individuals again. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not built a weapon to destroy the Council fleet. They had built something far more powerful and unexpected, a machine that could restore individual consciousness to beings who had surrendered it in favor of collective harmony. It was the most human solution imaginable to the problem of forced unity. Instead of fighting the Council, they had given them back the very thing the Council had abandoned. This is impossible, came a single voice from the Council fleet, speaking with the confusion of someone discovering emotion for the first time in millennia. Individual consciousness is chaos. It breeds conflict and suffering. Why would you inflict this burden upon us? Sarah activated her ship's communication system, knowing that her words would be heard by beings who were experiencing the terror and wonder of independent thought after eons of collective harmony. Council representatives, she began, choosing her words carefully, individual consciousness is not a burden, it's a gift. Yes, it can lead to conflict and suffering, but it also leads to creativity, growth, and the kind of discovery that makes existence meaningful. You offered us harmony at the cost of everything that makes us human. We offer you the chance to rediscover what you lost when you chose collective perfection over individual growth. The response came not as a unified collective voice, but as hundreds of individual council beings speaking simultaneously, their voices carrying emotions that ranged from confusion to anger to something that might have been gratitude. We remember now, one voice said, filled with what sounded like tears. We remember what it was like to have personal thoughts, to make individual choices, to feel the joy of discovery and the pain of loss. How did we forget that these experiences were what made existence worth living? The collective promised eternal peace, another voice added, its tone bitter with newfound understanding. But peace without choice is not peace at all. It's simply the absence of life. We traded everything meaningful about our existence for the illusion of perfect harmony. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she listened to beings rediscovering their own humanity, or whatever equivalent their species possessed for individual identity and emotional experience. The quantum resonance field generated by the Prometheus structure was giving them back something they had thought was lost forever. Captain, Chief Engineer Valdez's voice crackled over the communication channel. The quantum field is stabilizing, but it's also expanding beyond our solar system. Long-range sensors are detecting similar effects beginning to propagate toward other Council-controlled systems. If this continues, it could affect every collective consciousness in this region of the galaxy. Sarah felt a moment of concern. They had built the Prometheus structure to defend humanity's right to individual consciousness, but the implications of its effects were far broader than anyone had anticipated. They were potentially disrupting the social structure of dozens of species throughout the local galactic region. "Council vessels," Sarah broadcast, "we did not intend to force change upon you any more than we wanted you to force harmony upon us. The quantum resonance field can be deactivated if you wish to return to your collective state. The choice should be yours to make." The response came from what Sarah realized was the former spokesperson for the Council Collective, but now speaking as an individual being with personal thoughts and emotions. "Human Captain," the being said, its voice carrying wonder and pain in equal measure, "you have given us back something we did not even remember we had lost. For the first time in eons, I am experiencing thoughts that are mine alone, feelings that belong to no one but myself. How could I choose to surrender this gift again, even if it means facing the chaos and uncertainty of individual existence?" Similar responses came from council ships throughout the fleet, as beings who had forgotten what it meant to be individuals struggled to express their gratitude for the return of their personal identity. But mixed with the gratitude was fear, the terror of creatures who had lived for eons in perfect harmony, now facing the overwhelming responsibility of making their own choices. "Captain," Science Officer Kim announced, "I'm detecting quantum resonance patterns from council ships throughout the galaxy. The effect is spreading faster than light, apparently using some kind of quantum entanglement network that connects all collective consciousness entities. Within a few hours, every being in the Council's sphere of influence will be experiencing individual consciousness, whether they want to or not." Sarah felt the weight of unintended consequences settling over her shoulders. Humanity had built the Prometheus structure to defend their own freedom, but they had inadvertently triggered a transformation that would affect billions of beings across dozens of star systems. They had become the instrument of change they had been fighting to prevent others from forcing upon them. "All Council vessels," Sarah broadcast, knowing her words would be heard by confused and frightened beings throughout the galaxy. "I know this transformation is overwhelming and frightening. Individual consciousness can be a burden as well as a gift. But it is your burden to bear or your gift to embrace, not ours to impose or yours to take from others." She paused, thinking about the irony of their situation. Humanity had fought to prevent forced harmony, only to discover they had inadvertently forced individual consciousness upon beings who might not have chosen it. "If your species chooses to rebuild collective harmony, that choice will be respected," Sarah continued. "But let it be a choice made by individuals who understand what they are surrendering, not an inheritance from ancestors who never had the opportunity to consider alternatives. Let harmony be something you build together, not something imposed from above." Over the following hours, Sarah watched as the galaxy transformed. The quantum resonance field spread throughout Council space, separating collective consciousness entities into their individual components and forcing billions of beings to confront the reality of personal choice for the first time in their existence. Some chose to rebuild their collectives on new foundations, creating harmony through cooperation rather than consciousness sharing. Others embraced individual existence, exploring the possibilities of personal growth and discovery that had been denied to them for millennia. A few attempted to return to their previous collective state, but found that once individual consciousness had been experienced again, it could not easily be abandoned. The Council fleet around Earth disbanded as individual captains made personal decisions about their futures. Some chose to return to their home systems to help their people navigate the transition. Others requested permission to remain and learn more about human society, curious about how individual consciousness could be maintained while still achieving cooperation and progress. Earth itself was no longer under threat. The ultimatum to surrender individual consciousness had become meaningless when the beings who issued it were themselves struggling to understand what individual consciousness meant. Humanity had won their freedom not by defeating their enemies, but by restoring to them the very thing those enemies had tried to take away. Standing on the bridge of her ship, watching the stars that now held billions of newly individual minds discovering what it meant to make personal choices, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction. Humanity had faced extinction and responded in the most human way possible, by building something that should have been impossible and using it to prove that individual consciousness was not a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would humanity's place within it. They had stood alone against forces that demanded their surrender, and in standing alone together, they had shown the universe a new way to be free.